Let's go live to Canberra now. Joining us is the Treasurer Jim Chalmers. Treasurer, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. Are you setting up a class war for the next election?
Of course not, Peter. And, I think when people bandy that kind of language around, it's because they don't want to engage in the actual issue. What we're putting forward here is a modest but important change to superannuation tax concessions. It means that there will still be generous tax concessions for everybody in the superannuation system, just a little bit less generous for the 0.5% of people who have more than $3 million in their super. We're not messing with the fundamentals of superannuation. 99.5% of people are unaffected by the change that we announced yesterday, and it doesn't come in until after the election. So I think it's a sensible change, a common sense change, a modest change, but an important change in the context of a budget which has $1 trillion of debt and deficits as far as the eye can see.
Right.
We take seriously our responsibilities to clean up the mess that we were left.
Okay, yeah, but that change will be legislated this term, so that qualifies as a broken promise. How does the electorate have faith in you that no other changes will be made?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that it comes in after the election, and I think it's important that it's not a major change to superannuation. I said that there wouldn't be major changes, and this is a modest change. It's an important change, but it's not a major change to the system. Well, I'm not going to quibble over the language of it, Pete, but the point that I'm making is it's not a major change. I don't think it should be an especially controversial change. The country can't afford to have people subsidising more generous tax breaks for people with $100 million in their superannuation accounts. But it comes in deliberately after the election, and that means that people have got a couple of years to prepare for it. I think it's entirely appropriate that we legislate it before. If Peter Dutton and Angus Taylor want to go to the wall for these 0.5% of people with very large superannuation balances, the party that gave us $1 trillion in debt want to borrow even more money to give for these unaffordable tax breaks. I think that will be an issue at the election, and if they win the election, they can unwind it, but it means they have to tell us where the money will come from otherwise. The last time Peter Dutton had a savings idea, he hacked at universal health care and Medicare. We've got a different way to repair the budget. We take seriously our responsibilities to do that. We inherited a budget with $1 trillion of debt and deficits as far as the eye can see, and the pressures on the budget are intensifying rather than easing. That's why this step that we're taking is about responsible economic management.
But given the grand scheme of things, the savings here, $1 billion or $2 billion, it's not a whole lot of money.
Well, you can't argue at once that it's a big change, and on the other hand, it doesn't raise much money. We think it strikes the right balance. It's about $2 billion a year when it's fully up and running. It's only $900 million in the forward estimates, but about $2 billion a year after that when it gets going. And that will make a difference. That's a meaningful change to the budget, but you're right, in the context of a $50 billion tax concession each year in superannuation, it's relatively modest, but it's meaningful, it's important, and it's responsible.
Okay, well, that leads us nicely to my next point. Most of us, as you point out there, are not scooped up by this change, but the concern is that we might be down the track. So will that threshold be lowered from $3 million?
No, it won't, Pete. It'll stay at $3 million, and that's because we think it's the right threshold, but over time, we need to make the superannuation tax concessions more sustainable, and so it will stay at $3 million. We don't intend to bring it south of that. We think it's a really important
You don't intend now,
point.
but that might change down the track.
Well, it's not something that we're contemplating. We think it's important that 99.5% of Australians in the system are unaffected by this change. And again, for the 0.5% of people who are, they will still be able to access generous tax breaks for their superannuation. Everybody still has access to the same kinds of tax breaks in the system. They are still generous for people for more than $3 million, just a bit less generous as a consequence of this change.
Okay, any tinkering with nest eggs makes people nervous. So to be clear on a few other areas, can you rule out changes to capital gains tax on Australian homes?
Yeah, we said yesterday, Pete, that when you look at all of those tax breaks in the system, and I released a big paper yesterday which itemised them all and showed their impact on the budget, The one that we are focused on is the superannuation tax concessions. We're not focused on the others.
Okay, but you might be down the track?
Well, the statement that we put out yesterday is not some policy statement. It's not a statement of intent. It's information for people to understand the pressures on the budget. We made it really clear that our priority is superannuation, and even this change that we're announcing doesn't come in until after the election.
Well, see, now we're all honing in on specific words because, you know, certain words allow some wriggle room, as we've come to learn over the last 8 days. So capital gains tax, it's off the cards for you this term.
Yeah, it's not something that we've been focused on. And when it comes to the broader issue of superannuation, Pete, that you keep coming back to, and the words before the election, and that's fine and fair enough, it wasn't something that we were contemplating before the election. It wasn't something that we were contemplating in the October budget. But we need to do the right and responsible thing. And even though the budget's getting a bit better in the near term, this year and next, it's getting more difficult after that because the cost of servicing that $1 trillion of debt is going up when rates go up. The NDIS, healthcare, aged care, defence, all of these pressures on the budget are intensifying. And so we have to do the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing, taking the right path, is not always the path of least resistance. But we've got a responsibility to the Australian people to make the right decision, even if it comes at a political cost, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, but back on capital gains tax, one more here. How is $70 billion in housing tax breaks sustainable?
Well, you've got to look at the whole system, you know, and if you look at that information yesterday, the big 10 tax breaks in the system cost the budget about $150 billion. A third of that is superannuation, and that's one of the reasons why we made this modest change yesterday to superannuation tax concessions. I understand that people will focus on tax concessions right across the board. One of the reasons to provide this information is so that people can understand what the budget looks like when it comes to these tax breaks. But we made it really clear. Our priority is superannuation, and the change that we announced yesterday won't come in until after the election in any case. Okay,
but can you say that a priority won't be capital gains tax down the track?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've made that pretty clear, Pete. It's not the one that we're focused on. We're focused on superannuation.
What about negative gearing? Will there be changes there?
Well, it's the same answer. You know, the numbers that we put out yesterday, whether it's about negative gearing or capital gains or the other tax breaks in the system, we deliberately chose superannuation because we think those big superannuation balances are the best area for us to focus on, the best way to make the tax system a little bit more sustainable, superannuation a bit more affordable, and the budget a bit more responsible. I think we made it really clear yesterday what our priority is. And in putting an election between now and the changes coming into effect, it means we will take it to the people. And the choice at the election will be between a Labor Party managing the budget, managing the economy responsibly, versus a Liberal Party which is prepared to go to the wall for 0.5% of people who've got millions of dollars in their superannuation. Who'll still get generous tax breaks,
right,
even after this change that we're proposing, but it'll be a little bit less generous. And if they're not going to make this saving, they're not prepared to support Labor on this, then they've got to say where the money's coming from. And we know from Peter Dutton's form that when he needs money for the budget, he hacks into Medicare and universal healthcare in this country. And so there will be choices at the election.
Okay. Are you still committed to stage 3 tax cuts?
Yeah, our position hasn't changed on that, Pete. I think I've probably said to you a few times over.
Yeah, but things can change. Things can change, Treasurer, as we know.
It's not something we're focused on, not something that we're contemplating. Our position hasn't changed, and those tax cuts don't come in for more than a year. Okay,
a final one here, Treasurer. Can you be trusted to keep your word from here on in?
Oh, of course we can. Of course we can. And we take seriously that responsibility we have to the Australian people to try and make the right decisions, to make their budget a bit more responsible, to manage the economy effectively. You know, we've got national accounts numbers out today, Pete, which will give us a bit of a sense.
Okay, what are you expecting on that?
Well, it'll give us, it remains to be seen. We'll see the numbers at 11:30, but it will give us a sense of the impact of these difficult global conditions and the impact of these interest rate rises on the economy. We've said in the budget and subsequently that we expect the economy to slow this year. That's the Treasury forecast and the Reserve Bank forecast, but we'll see what the numbers say later on.
Okay.
We've got a lot coming at us from around the world, Pete, but we've got a lot going for us as well. All of these pressures coming at us from around the world are being felt around the kitchen table. We know that. Inflation is the defining challenge in our economy, and these rate rises and a global slowdown will have an impact on our economy more broadly as well.